The morning light spilled through the large glass windows of Harborview Diner, painting soft gold streaks across the linoleum floor. The place was alive with the sounds of clinking cutlery, sizzling bacon, and the low hum of an old jukebox that hadn't stopped playing country tunes since the 1980s. But behind the counter stood a woman who never quite seemed to belong in that chaos. Her name was Claire Donovan, early 30s, quiet, polite, and always composed. She wore the same light blue uniform every day, her name tag slightly crooked, her hair tied neatly in a low bun. To anyone who walked in, she was just another small-town waitress, refilling cups and offering warm smiles to tired travelers. But there was something about the way she moved, deliberate, efficient, precise, that made her different. Even the regulars noticed it. Claire folds napkins like she's prepping for an inspection. One of the truckers would joke. She times her coffee refills like clockwork, another added. Claire would only smile politely and say, "Old habits die hard." What no one knew was how true that was. Every morning, she woke before dawn, her body still trained to a rhythm she couldn't unlearn. She'd make her bed with hospital corners, run 2 miles along the coastal road, and stop by the cliffs to watch the sunrise over the Atlantic. From that spot, she could see the naval base in the distance, its towering radar domes and gray ships lined like silent sentinels. Sometimes, when the wind carried the sound of a chopper or the faint echo of horns from the harbor, she'd close her eyes and breathe in the memories she tried so hard to bury. Then she'd open her eyes and whisper to herself, "You're not that person anymore." By 6 a.m., she'd be at the diner, tying her apron, greeting her boss, Martha, a kind-hearted woman in her 50s who treated her like a daughter. Martha never asked much about Claire's past. All she knew was that Claire had arrived 2 years ago with a single suitcase, no family, and a need for quiet. "She's got the eyes of someone who's seen too much," Martha once told a coworker. "But she works like she's trying to forget it." The morning rush came like it always did, base workers, sailors, and long-haul drivers filling the booths with chatter and laughter. Claire worked the floor smoothly, balancing trays like it was second nature. She remembered faces, orders, and habits with uncanny precision. One of her regulars, Sergeant Mike Daniels, often teased her, "You sure you never served, Claire? You've got that military stance." She'd chuckle softly. "Just good posture, Sergeant." But the truth was, every time she heard the word served, something deep inside her twisted. Once upon a time, she had worn a uniform too. Once upon a time, she was Lieutenant Claire Hawkeye Donovan, U.S. Navy aerial surveillance officer, one of the best. Her call sign wasn't just for show. She earned it for her unmatched accuracy in identifying threats miles away. She'd saved lives, led missions, and made decisions that carried weight. And then, she'd made one decision too many, the kind that ended her career. The smell of coffee pulled her back to the present. She shook the thought away, forcing a smile for a table of young recruits. They looked barely 20, laughing about their training exercises and swapping stories of future deployments. She refilled their cups. "First time at sea?" she asked, trying to sound casual. One of them grinned. "Yes, ma'am. Heading out next week. Operation Sunrise." Her smile faltered for half a second. She recognized the name. It was a training operation she'd once helped plan years ago. She caught herself before they noticed. "Well," she said softly, "keep your head down and don't underestimate the wind out there." The boy blinked. "Yes, ma'am." They didn't know how much she knew about the sea, the sky, and the weight of command. During her break, Claire stepped outside to the small alley behind the diner. She lit a cigarette, though she never smoked more than one a day. The smoke curled in the cool air as she leaned against the brick wall, eyes fixed on the horizon where the base's flag fluttered faintly. She could almost hear it, the crackle of the radio, the tension in the cockpit, the voice of her old commanding officer shouting over the noise. "Stay on course, Hawkeye. Your eyes out there." She exhaled sharply, pushing the memory away. That voice belonged to a life she no longer claimed. But sometimes, no matter how hard she tried to forget, the past whispered back, not in words, but in reflexes. She still scanned her surroundings automatically, noticed patterns others missed, and reacted before most even realized something was off. That instinct never left. Inside, Martha called out, "Claire, sweetie, table 6 needs you." She crushed the cigarette under her shoe and went back in, returning to her rhythm as if nothing had interrupted it. She poured coffee, smiled, and listened to the same old jukebox tune, humming about freedom and home. Yet deep down, she knew she didn't really belong to either. Later that afternoon, a group of officers walked in, their uniforms crisp, boots polished, the kind of posture that made everyone else in the diner unconsciously sit straighter. Claire noticed instantly, not because of who they were, but because of how they carried themselves, the same silent authority she used to live under. She served them without saying a word. One of them noticed the subtle scar on her wrist, a mark she'd earned from shrapnel years ago. He didn't ask about it, but his curious gaze lingered a moment too long. Claire simply pulled down her sleeve and smiled politely. When the crowd thinned out and the sun began to set, she started cleaning the counter. The world outside turned amber, the air quiet except for the distant hum of a passing helicopter. The sound made her pause, heart skipping a beat. She set down the rag and stared out the window. The helicopter was flying low, too low. For a brief moment, instinct kicked in. Her mind calculated altitude, wind direction, and trajectory automatically. It was harmless, just a routine flight, but the way her brain reacted made her grip the counter tighter. "Still in there, aren't you?" she muttered under her breath. When her shift ended, she walked home through quiet streets lined with flickering lampposts. She lived in a small one-bedroom apartment overlooking the bay, neat, simple, and spotless. No photos, no medals, just silence. She made herself tea, sat by the window, and watched the waves break against the shore. From her window, she could see the base lights glimmering like stars on the water. Somewhere out there, people were still doing what she once did, watching the skies, making choices that could change lives. Claire took a deep breath and whispered, "They're better off without me." But deep inside, she wasn't sure she believed it. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside lay her old Navy insignia, a tarnished silver pin shaped like wings, the symbol of who she used to be. She ran her thumb over it gently, her reflection faint in the window behind it. "I'm just a waitress now," she told herself again, and yet, even as she said it, a part of her heart still beat to the rhythm of command, a part that would never let go. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of a ship's horn, long, low, and distant, the same sound that once signaled departure. Claire closed the box, her eyes soft but troubled. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it all again. Coffee, customers, quiet smiles. The world would keep spinning. What she didn't know, not yet, was that tomorrow would bring someone who would shatter that fragile peace. Someone who'd speak her name the way it hadn't been spoken in years. And when he did, the whole diner and her quiet world would fall completely silent. The next morning began like any other. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. The same pale sunrise brushed the Virginia coast in pinks and golds. The same seabirds circled over the harbor, calling out above the rhythmic crash of waves. Inside Harbor View Diner, the coffee machine hissed. The jukebox hummed a slow tune, and Claire Donovan moved through her morning routine as if on autopilot. Her hands knew every motion. Pour, wipe, serve, smile. She didn't need to think. That was how she preferred it, a rhythm without thought. Thought was dangerous. Thought led to memory, and memory led to pain. Martha had left her in charge of the early shift, and the smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the diner like a blanket. The base had been unusually active that week. Trucks passing more often, helicopters overhead, sailors coming in with stories of drills and new arrivals. Something big was happening. Claire had learned not to ask questions, but she noticed everything. The tension in their shoulders, the late hours, the way some avoided talking about tomorrow. It was the kind of silence she recognized, the kind that came before deployment. At 8:17 a.m., the bell above the door jingled as 3 officers walked in. They were young, loud, and full of swagger, the kind of sailors who thought the world bent around them. Claire greeted them with her usual calm smile and led them to a booth by the window. "Morning, gentlemen. Coffee?" she asked. "Always, ma'am," one of them said, grinning. "We're celebrating our last day on shore." She poured them coffee, nodded politely, and moved on. But their voices trailed after her. Talk of ships, fleet exercises, and a man who had everyone nervous. "Admiral Halvorsen's in town," one said. "The old man himself?" another replied. "Yep, fleet commander of the Atlantic Division. Guy's a legend and a nightmare in uniform." Claire froze for just a moment. The name hit her like a pulse beneath the skin. Halvorsen. She hadn't heard that name in years, and yet it came with an instant heavy weight. Her mind flickered, flashes of steel hallways, tense briefings, his deep voice echoing across command decks. She'd served under him once. He'd been fair, strict, and unyielding. A man who didn't just demand respect, he embodied it. But that was another lifetime. She shook it off, returned to the counter, and refilled a pot of coffee. "Not my world anymore," she whispered under her breath. By noon, the diner was full. Sailors, locals, base contractors, and a few tourists seeking a cheap meal near the coast. The air buzzed with chatter. Outside, gray clouds gathered, and the wind carried the scent of sea salt through the open door. Claire moved briskly between tables, her movements smooth and practiced, her mind elsewhere. That's when it happened. The door opened again, and the diner changed. He didn't have to say a word. The Admiral's presence filled the room like a tide rolling in. The low chatter dulled. Even the jukebox seemed quieter. He wasn't in full dress uniform, just a dark blue service coat, his posture perfectly straight, his eyes sharp beneath silver hair. Years of command had carved authority into every inch of him. Admiral Richard Halvorsen. Claire recognized him instantly, even though time had added a few lines to his face. She stood frozen behind the counter, the pot of coffee in her hand trembling slightly. She hadn't seen him since that day, the day everything had ended. She prayed he wouldn't notice her. But the Admiral was a man who noticed everything. He took a seat at the far corner booth, the one by the window overlooking the harbor. 2 younger officers accompanied him, standing until he gestured for them to sit. His deep voice carried through the diner, even though he spoke quietly, controlled, deliberate, the way commanders always did. Claire forced herself to move, to breathe. She grabbed the coffee pot, steadied her shaking hands, and approached his table. She could feel her pulse in her throat. When she reached him, he didn't look up immediately. He was scanning a file in front of him, probably mission briefs or reports. She cleared her throat gently. "Coffee, sir?" she asked. He looked up. For a split second, the world stopped moving. His eyes, sharp, gray-blue, commanding, met hers. And though it lasted only a moment, it felt like 1,000 thoughts passed between them. Recognition flickered faintly across his expression, but he said nothing. Not yet. Claire poured the coffee, careful not to spill. She could feel the eyes of his aides on her. She muttered a polite, "Enjoy your meal," and turned to walk away. But before she could take 2 steps, one of the younger officers chuckled softly and said, "Best service we've had all week, Admiral." Halvorson's reply was absent, distracted. He was still watching her retreating figure. Something tugged at the back of his mind. A memory, a voice from long ago. At the counter, Claire pretended to busy herself wiping glasses. Her hands were steady again, but her heartbeat wasn't. She could feel his gaze still on her. She tried not to look back, but her eyes betrayed her once. Just once, and when she looked, he was still watching, not out of curiosity, but out of certainty. He knew. She didn't know how, but he knew. Minutes passed. The Admiral continued his meal in silence, though he barely touched his food. The conversation at his table was brief, clipped, filled with military shorthand. Claire caught fragments: fleet readiness, Atlantic drills, intel handoff. The kind of talk that used to be her world. Her chest tightened. She wanted to leave, to walk into the back room, to disappear. But she stayed. Because that's what soldiers do. They stay, even when their legs shake. She carried a tray of pie slices to another table. Just as she turned, a group of young sailors entered, laughing too loudly. One bumped her shoulder. The tray wobbled, and for the first time in years, she lost control. Hot coffee splashed across the Admiral's table. The diner gasped. Claire froze. The pot slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor. She immediately grabbed napkins, apologizing in a trembling voice. "I'm so sorry, sir. That was completely." Halvorsen stood, slowly, calmly. His aides rose with him, but he waved them down. And then, in that same deep voice that once commanded fleets, he said softly, "Lieutenant Hawkeye Donovan, is that you?" The words hit her like a wave crashing through glass. The diner went silent. Every voice, every breath, stopped. The young sailors turned, confused. Martha peeked from the kitchen, a dish towel in hand, sensing something unusual. Claire's world narrowed to that single moment, the name she hadn't heard in years, spoken aloud in front of strangers. Her throat tightened. "Not anymore, sir," she whispered. But it was too late. The silence had already told the story. The Admiral's face softened, not with pity, but with respect. His aides exchanged uncertain glances. Around the diner, whispers began. "Lieutenant? Navy? Her?" Claire's eyes shimmered with something between fear and defiance. She didn't want this. She didn't want them to know. But the Admiral had spoken truth, and truth never stayed buried forever. He looked at her for another long moment before nodding slightly, almost like an acknowledgement only they could understand. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said quietly, his tone gentle now. "It's good to see you again, Lieutenant." She stood frozen, eyes lowered, hands trembling. The weight of who she used to be pressed against her, like the tide against a drowning ship. Finally she whispered, "Thank you, sir," and turned away. The Admiral sat back down, his expression unreadable. The whispers continued, soft and curious. No one dared to ask, but everyone wanted to know. Claire disappeared into the back room, breathing hard, gripping the counter to steady herself. Her past had walked straight through the door and spoken her name out loud for the first time in years. And there was no taking it back. That night, long after the diner closed and the lights dimmed, Claire sat alone in the dark, staring at her reflection in the window. She could still hear his voice, the way he'd said her call sign, Hawkeye, like it still meant something. Like she still meant something. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure who she really was anymore. The quiet waitress, or the woman who once commanded the skies. Outside, Thunder rolled in the distance, low and steady, like the echo of a faraway engine. Something had shifted, and deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The sound of shattering glass still echoed in Claire's mind, long after the last shard had been swept away. It was the sound that divided before from after. Before, she had been the quiet waitress with the soft voice and perfect timing. After, she was the woman everyone stared at, the one the Admiral had called by a name no one understood. She spent the next hour in the back room, the smell of spilled coffee clinging to her clothes, her heartbeat still uneven. Through the thin door she heard muffled voices, Martha apologizing to customers, chairs scraping, the register's chime. Then the door creaked open. "Sweetheart?" Martha's voice was low, careful. "He's gone. You can breathe now." Claire nodded, but didn't look up. "Did he say anything else?" "Only that you made the best coffee he'd had in years." Martha tried a smile, but curiosity flickered behind it. "Claire, who is he?" Claire hesitated. The truth was a heavy thing, and once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. "Just someone I used to work for," she said finally. "A lifetime ago." Martha studied her, then sighed. "Well, whoever he is, he sure made an impression." She touched Claire's arm gently. "Take 5 more minutes, then come out. The dinner rush won't wait." When the door closed again, Claire pressed both hands to her face. Lieutenant Hawkeye Donovan. The name pulsed through her like a heartbeat she tried to silence. It wasn't just a title, it was an identity, built from years of service, duty, and one fatal decision that had cost her everything. The next day, the diner buzzed with quiet speculation. Regulars whispered between bites of pancakes. The young sailors who had been there retold the moment again and again, exaggerating the Admiral's tone, her reaction, the silence that had filled the room. Claire kept her head down and worked. She smiled when required refilled cups and ignored the curious glances. But every clang of a coffee cup sounded like a gunshot in her mind. That evening, just as the dinner crowd began to thin, the bell over the door jingled again. She turned and froze. The Admiral had come back. He wasn't in uniform this time. A dark civilian coat replaced the jacket of authority. Yet the air shifted as soon as he entered. People recognized him from yesterday, murmurs rippled, and then the diner fell quiet again. He approached the counter slowly. "Miss Donovan?" Her breath caught. She forced a professional smile. "Admiral. Coffee?" He nodded. "Please." She poured without shaking this time. When she set the cup down, he really studied her. "You still use your left hand for pours." "I remember that." She blinked. "You remember that?" "I remember every member of my team who saved lives." His tone softened. "Especially the ones who vanished." Claire said nothing. Silence filled the gap where confession should have been. Finally she whispered, "Why are you here, sir?" "Really?" He looked toward the window, where gray waves rolled beneath a darkening sky. "Because you deserve to know something. After the Aden rescue, they blamed you. They said you disobeyed protocol. But the truth finally surfaced. Your call saved that extraction. Command's report cleared your name last year." Her heart stuttered. "Cleared?" He nodded once. "Posthumously at first. They thought you were dead." A small, wry smile. "You're not easy to find when you don't want to be." Claire's knees weakened. For years, she had carried the shame of a career ended in disgrace, believing she'd been erased from the records. Now this man stood here, telling her she'd been exonerated. Freedom should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like exposure. "I'm not that person anymore," she said quietly. "I don't belong to that world." Halvorsen's gaze was steady. "The world doesn't always care where you belong, Lieutenant. Sometimes it calls you back anyway." He left soon after, leaving payment for his coffee and a folded piece of paper under the cup. When she finally dared to open it, she found coordinates and address near the naval base and 2 words written in crisp handwriting: foreclosure. She folded the paper and slipped it into her apron, unsure whether to burn it or follow it. That night, the sky over the bay turned storm gray. Wind rattled her apartment windows as she sat on the couch, turning the paper over and over in her hands. She remembered the Admiral's expression, not pity, not command, but something closer to understanding. She had seen that look only once before, the night he'd handed her the mission that had changed everything. Her mind drifted backward through time. 9 years earlier, the operations room glowed in red light, maps spread across screens. Claire, then 26, leaned over her console, headset pressed to one ear. Target convoy approaching Sector Charlie. Thermal confirms hostiles 20+. Halvorson's voice cut through the static. Extraction team is pinned. Can you get them a corridor? Negative. They'll need to divert west through the canyon. That's off limits. She hesitated, then said firmly, "Sir, it's their only chance." He paused. "Do it." She did, and 20 minutes later, every soldier made it out alive. But politics wanted a scapegoat for the chaos that followed, and her decision became the mark against her record. By the time the truth reached command, she was gone. A knock at the door pulled her back to the present. She stiffened, heart hammering. Through the peephole she saw a young man in uniform, rain dripping from his cap. When she opened the door, he saluted smartly. "Ma'am, the Admiral asked me to deliver this." He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a simple invitation, an official seal, date, and time. Naval Station Norfolk. Briefing Room 4. Below it, a handwritten line. Sometimes closure isn't silence. Sometimes it's answers. She stared at the words for a long time after the sailor left. The storm outside howled, waves battering the rocks below her window. For years, she'd built walls around her past. Now the past was knocking politely, asking for 5 minutes of her time. She poured herself tea, sat by the window, and tried to imagine what she'd say if she went. She saw herself walking into that room, faces turning, old ghosts whispering her call sign. The idea made her chest tighten, yet somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered curiosity, maybe hope. The next morning she returned to the diner as usual, pretending nothing had changed. But Martha saw the difference immediately. "You're quieter than usual," she said. Claire smiled faintly. "Didn't think that was possible." Martha laughed, then looked at her more closely. "You going to tell me what's really going on?" Claire hesitated, then slipped the invitation from her apron and placed it on the counter. Martha read it, eyes widening. "You're going back?" "I don't know," Claire admitted. "Maybe I need to hear what they have to say." Martha squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide, just don't let the past steal your peace again." Claire nodded, grateful. But peace had already begun to slip through her fingers. Every sound of the harbor ship horns, gulls, distant engines felt like a message, a pull she couldn't ignore. That night, she took the envelope, placed it on the table, and stared at it under the dim kitchen light. The storm had cleared, leaving the world washed and silent. Somewhere out at sea, a ship's lights blinked against the horizon. She remembered standing on decks like that, salt wind biting her face, believing she was part of something larger than herself. Her fingers traced the edges of the envelope until she whispered, "Maybe one last time." She didn't yet know that this choice, the simple decision to seek answers, would drag her into the heart of something far bigger than closure. It would test everything she'd buried, everything she thought she'd lost. For now, she folded the invitation, placed it carefully beside her old insignia, and turned out the light. Outside, the ocean murmured like an old friend calling her home. The sun rose pale and cold over Norfolk Harbor, painting the sea in muted gold. Claire hadn't slept. The invitation sat on the table beside a half-empty cup of tea, edges curled from where her fingers had worried it through the night. By 6 a.m., she made her decision. She showered, tied her hair back, and pulled out a dark gray coat from the back of her closet. It wasn't military issue, but the cut was crisp, formal, almost like armor. As she left her apartment, the morning air hit her face, brisk and salty. The city was just waking. Fishermen unloading crates, gulls screeching above the docks, the rhythmic thud of waves against wood. Claire's footsteps echoed down the narrow pier as she walked toward the bus that would take her to the naval station. When she arrived at the Norfolk Naval Base, her heart twisted in a way she hadn't expected. The place looked the same long stretches of concrete, the metallic smell of oil and sea, but it felt like walking through a photograph of her own life. At the gate, a young officer in pressed blues checked her ID. His eyes flicked over her name, then widened slightly before he handed it back. "Welcome back, Lieutenant," he said quietly, as if unsure whether it was true. She didn't correct him. Inside the base, the corridors felt colder. Her shoes clicked against the polished floor as she followed the path to briefing room 4. Every step was a conversation with ghosts, the laughter of her old team, the hum of radios, the low bark of command. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Through the glass, she saw Admiral Halvorsen standing at the front of a long table, papers spread before him. 2 other officers were seated, a woman with cropped hair and a man in a gray suit who didn't look military at all. Claire drew a deep breath and stepped inside. "Lieutenant Donovan," Halvorsen said, straightening. "Thank you for coming." "Admiral," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You said this was about closure." "It is," he said. "And something more." The woman stood and offered a hand. "Commander Rachel Stokes, Intelligence Division." The man in gray didn't move, only nodded. "Robert Finch, Department of Defense Oversight." Claire shook the commander's hand. "I'm not sure what any of this is about." Halvorsen gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." Once she did, he pushed a folder toward her. On the cover was a familiar red stamp. "Classified? Operation Sea Glass?" Her breath caught. "That's impossible." Sea Glass was destroyed, scrubbed from the record. "Not entirely," Halvorsen said. "A partial data log resurfaced. It contained your transmissions from the Aden mission. The ones proving your call saved 23 lives." Claire's throat tightened. "You already told me that." "Yes," Finch said, his tone sharp. "But what you don't know is how it resurfaced." He slid a photo across the table. A young man in civilian clothes, dark eyes, serious expression. "This is Elias Ward," Finch continued. "Former systems analyst, naval contractor. He accessed encrypted files marked for deletion last year. 2 weeks after, he vanished." Claire frowned. "And you think this connects to me?" Stokes nodded. "He left a message and audio fragment. It included your call sign, Hawkeye," he said. "Tell her the pattern wasn't random." A chill ran down Claire's spine. "What pattern?" "That," Halvorsen said, "is what we're trying to figure out." They played the fragment. Static filled the room, followed by a man's hurried voice. "If she's alive, tell her Hawkeye was right. The coordinates weren't random. They were a map hidden in the mission logs." Then, silence. Claire sat frozen. The sound of her old code name spoken by a stranger felt like a ripple in time. "A map to what?" she asked softly. Finch leaned back. "That's what we'd like you to help us determine. You were the only one who handled those transmissions in real time. You might recognize something we don't." Her pulse quickened. You're asking me to return to an operation that ruined my life. Halvorsen's voice softened. No one's ordering you, Claire. We're asking voluntarily. She looked at the folder again, the faded ink, the ghosts of her own handwriting in the margins. She'd sworn never to touch this world again, but the unanswered question burned hotter than fear. Finally, she said, if I do this, I need full access. Logs, reports, flight data, everything. Stokes exchanged a glance with Halvorsen. You'll have it. Hours later, she sat alone in a dim archive room, surrounded by screens and dusty files. The hum of machinery filled the silence as she scrolled through data logs. The timestamps, the coordinates, the communication bursts, they were familiar. Yet something tugged at the edge of her memory. Her call sign appeared in one of the entries. Hawkeye. Authorization override 947Z. She frowned. That's not my timestamp, she murmured. I made that override at 9:45. 2 minutes difference. 2 minutes that didn't belong to her. She opened the attached data line and froze. Someone had inserted a second signal piggybacked on her transmission. A thin line of code, invisible unless you knew where to look. It wasn't military formatting. It was civilian. Her stomach dropped. Elias Ward. She searched deeper. The signal wasn't random, it repeated at intervals, forming a chain of coordinates across the Indian Ocean. When plotted, they aligned perfectly along known shipping routes. But at the center was one blank patch of region with no satellite coverage, no official activity. She whispered, a dead zone. When she emerged from the archives, Halvorsen was waiting. Find something? Yes, she said. Someone used my signal as a carrier wave. A hidden transmission, embedded during sea glass. It wasn't ours. Halvorsen's jaw tightened. What kind of transmission? Coordinates. But not to anything we logged. He exhaled slowly. That explains why Elias went off-grid. Claire crossed her arms. You think he found whatever was at those coordinates? That's one possibility, Finch said as he entered the room. Another is that he created it. Claire frowned. Created what? Halvorsen looked grim. A ghost operation. Unofficial. Someone used your mission as cover to move something or someone through the naval grid. Elias found traces of it. Claire's mind spun. The idea was insane. Yet it fit too neatly. The politics, the blame, the quick shutdown of her career. It had all been too convenient. Someone used me, she said quietly. They made me the scapegoat to bury the trail. Halvorsen nodded once. And now it's coming back to the surface. As the sun sank over the harbor, painting the sky in molten orange, Claire stood outside the base, the file clutched in her hand. The world she had tried to leave behind had opened its jaws again, pulling her back into the storm. She should have felt vindicated, proven, right, after all these years. Instead, she felt the same hollow ache she'd felt the day she walked away. A weight of truths too dangerous to speak. The Admiral joined her on the steps. You don't have to go further, he said quietly. You've done enough. She looked at him, eyes hard. No, not this time. I want to know who they were using and what they were hiding. A gust of sea wind whipped across the pier, carrying the faint cry of gulls. Halvorsen watched her, then nodded slowly. Then I'll back you. But understand, Claire, digging into this could put you on someone's radar again. She smiled faintly. Guess I'll have to start flying under it. For a long moment, they stood side by side, watching the waves roll in. Somewhere beneath those shifting waters, secrets slept buried beneath years of silence and betrayal. And for the first time in a decade, Lieutenant Hawkeye Donovan was ready to go hunting again. The next morning, the world felt sharper sounds louder, air colder, light too bright. Claire hadn't closed her eyes all night. The file from the archives lay open across her kitchen table, pages covered in markings and coordinates. Every number, every signal timestamp whispered a mystery she was desperate to unravel. She brewed coffee black, strong, and stared at the pattern she'd drawn on a notepad. The chain of coordinates stretched across the Indian Ocean like a trail of breadcrumbs. But at the center sat that blank patch, the dead zone. No satellite data, no communication logs. Nothing but static. She touched the pen to the map. "What were you hiding, Elias?" she murmured. By mid-morning, she was back at the base, leaning over a console in the intelligence lab. Commander Stokes stood beside her, scanning the screen. "You said the signal repeated every 48 hours?" "Exactly," Claire replied. "Same pulse, same pattern, but the origin shifts slightly each cycle, as if it's following a moving vessel." Stokes frowned. "That's impossible. No ship could maintain that trajectory without being flagged. Unless someone cloaked it under civilian shipping data." Claire tapped a few keys, overlaying commercial routes. "See this gap? That's the exact position of the Mercy Dawn, a supply carrier registered to a private humanitarian outfit." Stokes leaned closer. "You think the Mercy Dawn is the ghost?" "I think it was. And maybe Elias found proof." Halvorsen entered then, his presence filling the room. "We ran your findings through naval intelligence," he said. "Turns out, the Mercy Dawn was contracted by a defense subcontractor called Orphic Systems." Claire's head snapped up. "Orphic? They handled data encryption during sea gloss." "Exactly," Halvorsen said grimly. "And they went bankrupt 3 months after your mission. Convenient timing." Claire folded her arms. "So Orphic used my transmission to move something, then disappeared before anyone could trace it." "Or someone made them disappear," Stokes added quietly. Later, in a windowless conference room, they combed through archived manifests and communication records. Hours passed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. Claire rubbed her temples. Every log from the Mercy Dawn was wiped after the 24th of March, the same day Elias went missing. Halvorsen nodded slowly. "You see it now, don't you? He wasn't the first to dig. Someone erased the ship, then him." The realization settled like lead in her chest. They're still covering their tracks. "Which means whatever was on that ship is still out there," Halvorsen said. "And if we don't find it, someone else will." That night, Claire drove to the harbor. The docks were nearly empty, waves slapping against hulls, the tongue of salt heavy in the air. A few fishing boats rocked in the distance, their lights swaying like ghosts on black water. She leaned against the railing, looking out over the ocean. For years, she had convinced herself she didn't miss it, the smell of diesel and salt, the endless horizon. But standing there now, she realized how deeply the sea still claimed her. A voice behind her broke the silence. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" She turned. Commander Stokes stood a few feet away, hands in her pockets, hair tied back tight. "Didn't expect company," Claire said. "Admiral thought you might come down here. He said this is where you used to clear your head before deployments." Claire smiled faintly. "He remembers too much." Stokes stepped beside her, watching the water. "You were a legend, you know. The best recon officer we had. The way you could see patterns where no one else did." "That's what they said, until I saw one they didn't want me to," Claire replied softly. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence. Then Stokes said, "You think Elias might still be alive?" Claire's gaze didn't waver from the horizon. If he figured out what was hidden in those coordinates, someone would want him gone. But maybe he knew that and ran. Ran where? Someplace no one would look. The dead zone? The next day brought confirmation of a sort. A satellite update from civilian mapping services showed faint movement in the dead zone's border. A drifting signal, too small to be a ship, but too regular to be random interference. Claire's pulse jumped. That's him. Or what's left of the Mercy Dawn. Finch wasn't convinced. It could be debris, electromagnetic noise. It's not noise, Claire cut in. It's a beacon. Look at the modulation. It matches Elias's encryption signature. Halvorsen glanced between them. What are you suggesting? Let me go, Claire said. I can track it. If it's a beacon, it'll lead to whatever he found. Finch scoffed. We can't just authorize a field operation based on a hunch. Halvorsen's tone hardened. It's not a hunch if Hawkeye says it's a lead. She's earned that name. The room fell silent. Claire met the Admiral's eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, a trust forged long ago in the smoke of impossible missions. 2 days later, she was aboard the Arcturus, a gray naval vessel retrofitted for research. The deck hummed beneath her boots, and the smell of the sea filled her lungs. It felt both foreign and familiar, like stepping into a dream she once lived. Long time since you've worn one of these, Halvorsen said, handing her a headset as the ship prepared to leave port. I said I'd never come back, she admitted. And yet here you are. Guess closure needs a compass. The Admiral smiled faintly, then turned to bark orders at the crew. Within minutes, the ship eased away from the dock, engines rumbling as the harbor lights faded behind them. Days passed at sea. Claire spent hours hunched over radar screens, eyes scanning every flicker of static. The beacon signal was faint but steady, leading them deeper into open water. On the third night, a storm hit, violent, thrashing, relentless. Waves slammed against the hull, and lightning split the horizon. Claire gripped the rail as rain lashed her face, the wind howling like some ancient beast. Stokes appeared beside her, shouting over the roar. We should head back. Not yet. Claire yelled. The signal's peaking. We're close. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the sea, and there it was. A dark shape looming between waves. Not a ship, not wreckage, something smaller, metallic, half-submerged. Claire's eyes widened. There! Bearing 065. The Arcturus veered toward it. The crew dropped floodlights, and beams cut through rain and foam. What emerged made the deck fall silent. It was a capsule, sleek, cylindrical, scarred by salt and time. Faded letters across its side read, Project Orphic, property of U.S. Defense Command. Halvorsen's voice was tight. Retrieve it. The crew hauled the capsule aboard, chains rattling. Water poured from its seams, hissing as it hit the deck. Claire knelt beside it, brushing away grime. A small panel blinked weakly, power barely alive. She looked up. It's transmitting. Can you open it? Stokes asked. Claire hesitated, fingers tracing the old logo. I think it's waiting for an access code. What kind? Halvorsen asked. She met his gaze. Mine. The realization struck them all at once. Someone had built this device with her authentication key, her old military signature. She wasn't just framed for sea glass. She had been integral to hiding whatever this was. Claire swallowed hard. Whoever did this used me as the lock. Then open it, Halvorsen said quietly. She entered the code, her old call sign, followed by an authorization sequence she hadn't typed in nearly a decade. The panel blinked once, then glowed green. A soft hiss escaped as the capsule sealed open, revealing a compact drive inside, still intact, still running. Claire lifted it carefully. This is it. Elias's map. Orphic's secret. Rain battered the deck. The Admiral watched her, expression unreadable. Whatever's on that drive, Claire, it's going to change everything. She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the small blinking light. Then let's find out who's been writing our story. The capsule's metallic surface glistened under the deck lights as Claire carefully removed the small data drive. Its compact size belied the weight it carried, not in pounds, but in secrets. She held it like a fragile relic, one that could either vindicate or destroy what remained of her reputation. Halvorsen stood a few feet away, eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Careful, Donovan. That drive may contain more than we're prepared to see." Claire's fingers trembled as she inserted the drive into the mobile analysis terminal aboard the Arcturus. The screen blinked alive, streams of code cascading down like a waterfall of digital whispers. The ship pitched as waves slammed against the hull, rain beating a relentless tattoo on the deck. "This isn't just data," Claire muttered under her breath. Her old instincts flared, eyes scanning lines of encrypted code, hands moving over the keyboard with the precision of someone who had once orchestrated missions in the air and sea. Commander Stokes leaned over her shoulder. "What is it?" she asked, voice low. Claire shook her head. "It's a network of operational logs from Orphic systems. Embedded within them are mission trajectories, asset transfers, and unregistered communications. Someone used my mission as a cover for every movement. Every transmission I made was a lock. Every code one entered a key. They didn't just erase me, they hid the operation behind my work." Halvorsen exhaled, jaw tight. This is worse than I thought." Hours passed. The Arcturus cut through the choppy waters, the storm above a constant roar. Claire's eyes burned from staring at the screens, decoding one encrypted file after another. Then she found it. A folder labeled Sea Glass Alpha. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't expected to see that title again. Inside, lines of code blinked at her like the heartbeat of a hidden world. Claire opened the folder, scanning for anything familiar. And there it was, a transmission she recognized immediately. Her own flight logs from the Aiden mission, overlaid with an encrypted payload she had never entered. "They used me," she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "Every move I made, every override. They were tracking, redirecting, manipulating. Someone was controlling the outcome from behind the scenes." Stokes stared at her. "And Elias found this." Claire nodded. He traced the pattern, realized the coordinates weren't random. They weren't meant for logistics. They were a map. A map to something or someone that had to remain hidden. Finch spoke for the first time since their arrival, voice harsh. "If someone used your operational codes, they could have moved anything without detection. Weapons, intelligence, even personnel. Anything." Halvorsen's gaze locked on Claire. "You're saying the mission we thought failed, the one that ruined your career, it was manipulated?" Claire's hands shook. "Exactly. And that means the truth has been buried for over a decade until Elias uncovered it." The storm subsided as night fell. The sea was calmer, but the tension aboard the ship was palpable. Every officer, every crew member, seemed to sense the magnitude of what they were uncovering. Claire isolated one of the payloads and decrypted it. A video file blinked onto the screen. The resolution was grainy, but the contents were unmistakable. A young man, Elias Ward, recording a confession, or perhaps a warning. "I know you're watching this," his voice said, nervous but steady. "If you're seeing this, it means they're closing in. Everything we thought was secure wasn't. They've been moving assets, covering operations, using every mission as camouflage, including Hawkeye's. You need to find her. She's the only one who can stop it." Claire's pulse spiked. He called her by her call sign Hawkeye. Not Lieutenant, not Claire, but the name she hadn't heard in years. It resonated like an echo of who she used to be. "Where are you now?" she whispered to the empty room. The video ended abruptly, the screen going black. Stokes broke the silence. That's it? No coordinates? Nothing. Claire shook her head. He mentioned assets. But the map is hidden within the code. He left it for someone who knew how to read it. She looked up at Halvorsen. That means it's mine. Halvorsen leaned against the console. You understand what this means, right? Whoever orchestrated this, they're still out there. And they're powerful. Claire's eyes hardened. I know, but I can't let them get away with it. I won't. Finch frowned. And if this puts you in danger? She didn't answer. The wind whipped through the open deck doors, tossing her hair into her face. For a moment, she closed her eyes, remembering the roar of engines, the hum of avionics, the calm before a strike. Her hands were steady, her mind razor-sharp. She was Hawkeye again. And she would act. The decrypted logs revealed patterns she recognized immediately: shipping routes, supply transfers, and coded communications embedded within otherwise mundane data. Every coordinate matched the intervals of the hidden beacon they had found aboard the capsule. It's a breadcrumb trail, she said. Elias laid it out, but he knew someone would be watching. He designed it for someone who could read between the lines. Stokes leaned closer. And that's you. Claire nodded. The sequence aligns with my override patterns during sea glass. If I follow it, I can predict where the next hidden asset or Elias might be. Halvorsen's eyes were steely. Then you're going back into the field. She hesitated for only a moment. I don't go back lightly, Admiral. But I can't ignore this. Not after everything. He gave a small nod. Then you won't be alone. We'll provide support, intelligence, extraction, communications. But the lead, that's yours. The next morning, Claire charted a course using the decoded coordinates. The pattern led them across international waters, through shipping lanes, and into a remote area in the Indian Ocean. Every move was precise, calculated, and deliberate, just like her old missions. As the Arcturus approached the final sector, Claire felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She could feel the presence of her past, the meticulous calculations, the instinct to see patterns where none existed, the ability to act decisively under pressure. She was no longer a waitress. She was Lieutenant Hawkeye Donovan, and she was back in the sky and sea of decisions that could save or destroy lives. The capsule was just the beginning, she whispered. The real story starts here. Halvorsen's voice came over her shoulder, calm and commanding. Then let's finish it together. The wind whipped across the deck. Waves crashed against the hull. Somewhere beneath the surface, the hidden files awaited, and with them, the answers to questions she had lived with for over a decade. Claire gripped the tablet, her jaw set. This was no longer about closure. It was about truth. And the truth would not remain hidden. The Arcturus cut through the calm Indian Ocean, leaving a silver wake behind it as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon. Claire Donovan stood at the bow, eyes fixed on the coordinates the decrypted files had revealed. Every fiber of her body was alert, every sense sharpened. She could feel the old tension, the one that came with a mission that could decide life and death coiling through her veins like electricity. The ship's crew moved efficiently, their quiet murmurs filling the command deck as Halvorsen and Commander Stokes monitored radar feeds. But Claire was alone in her thoughts. She knew the gravity of what lay ahead. Whoever had manipulated Operation Seaglass had ensured that she would carry the key to unraveling it. And now, for the first time in a decade, the hidden players would be exposed. Hours later, the radar flickered. A small, fast-moving object appeared on the edge of detection. Claire's breath caught. A pattern matched the ghost coordinates perfectly. Target bearing 078, she said, her voice low but precise. Distance 12 nautical miles. Speed is consistent with previous beacon signatures. It's moving exactly along the trajectory Elias encoded. Halvorsen leaned over her shoulder. You're certain? Claire nodded. I've cross-referenced every variable. Tide patterns, satellite coverage, ship manifests. Whoever this is, they're aware we're coming. But they're predictable. Elias left the trail for me, because he trusted only me to follow it. Stokes's eyes narrowed. Then what are we waiting for? Claire exhaled. Patience. One false move, and this disappears again, just like before. By mid-afternoon, the shape resolved into a sleek, gray vessel, half-submerged in a concealed cove. Its exterior was worn, salt-crusted, with no visible markings other than a faint logo etched into the metal, a stylized O. Orphic Systems. Looks abandoned, a crewman whispered. Or deliberately inviting, Claire muttered. She studied the surrounding waters. No support vessels, no other traffic. Just the hidden cove and the wind-swept horizon. Halvorsen's voice was calm but firm. Prepare a boarding team. Claire, you lead. The tension in her chest coiled tighter. She glanced at Stokes. Stay close. We don't know what's inside or what's waiting for us. The small boarding boat slipped quietly into the cove. Claire's heart thudded as they drew near the Orphic vessel. Its hull scraped against rocks beneath the water, but the ship had been maintained enough to float. The beacon pulsed faintly from a compartment below deck, the signal Elias had left, guiding her like a ghost through time. Claire climbed aboard first, boots hitting the deck with quiet authority. The ship smelled of rust and brine, old engines, and something chemical she couldn't place. She followed the signal down a narrow metal corridor, past darkened cabins and locked storage rooms. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching toward her, as if warning her to turn back. At the end of the corridor, a door with electronic locks blinked softly. Claire pulled the tablet from her coat pocket, entered the access codes, the ones only she could replicate, and the panel hissed open. Inside was a small chamber, dimly lit, with rows of consoles and a single monitor glowing. But it wasn't empty. A figure rose from the shadows, a tall man, hair graying at the temples, eyes sharp and calculating. He wore a tailored suit, civilian but authoritative, and the faintest smirk tugged at his lips. "You've been busy," he said, voice calm, almost amused. "I wondered when Hawkeye Donovan would find me." Claire froze. Recognition hit her like a thunderclap. He was the architect. The one who had orchestrated everything, blamed her for sea glass, hidden the assets, erased Elias. "You," she said, voice tight with anger. "You're behind this." The man tilted his head. "I prefer coordinator. And yes, every move, every accident orchestrated to perfection. You were remarkable. That's why I used you." Halvorsen's voice came over her calm. "Claire, be careful. Don't engage physically until we understand his capabilities." But Claire wasn't listening. She took a slow step forward. "Used me? People died because of you. I lost everything because of you. Elias. Is he alive because of you? Or because you wanted him erased?" The man's smirk faded. Elias Ward. Brilliant. Curious. Dangerous. He found out more than he should have. He created a breadcrumb trail, knowing someone would follow. That's why you were essential. I didn't want him dead. I just controlled the exposure. Controlled? She repeated, voice rising. You manipulated every mission, every person, every asset, just to hide your tracks. You call that control? He shrugged. I call it efficiency. You should understand that, Lieutenant. Every mission has variables. Every variable needs containment. You were simply the most competent operative to execute it unknowingly. Claire's fists clenched. Her training screamed at her to act, but she forced herself to think. She had the Admiral's backup. She had the coordinates. And she had Elias's breadcrumb trail to follow. "You're going to pay for this," she said quietly, voice low but lethal. "And you're going to tell us everything, starting now." The man's eyes glinted. "Do you really think it's that simple?" From behind, Stokes and a team of officers entered silently, blocking every exit. Finch monitored communications, ready to jam signals and prevent escape. The man realized he was surrounded, yet his demeanor remained unshaken. "You've cornered me," he said slowly. "But the world doesn't operate in corners, Lieutenant. You think stopping me here will end it? Sea Glass, Orphic Systems, Elias. It's all part of something bigger. You don't even know the half of it." Claire stepped closer, eyes narrowed. "Then tell us." "Because I will find the rest." The man paused, studying her. For a moment, there was silence, just the hum of equipment and the distant crash of waves. Then he nodded, almost reluctantly. "Very well," he said. "You want the truth?" Elias wasn't the only one who noticed. There's a network hidden within the government, within private contractors, within operations like Sea Glass. Every mission was a test, a cover for transfers, surveillance, and power consolidation. Orphic was a tool, and I was an operator. But there are others higher ups, untouchable, who designed the framework. Elias stumbled into it. You stumbled into it. And now, he trailed off, eyes flicking toward Claire, a faint smirk returning. Now, you've become part of it too. Only difference. You can actually see it. Claire's hands shook not from fear, but from fury. Then I'll expose it. Every secret, every lie. No one's untouchable. Halvorsen's voice was calm but firm. "Claire, we need evidence, not just confrontation. Secure the data. Let's bring it all back to Norfolk." The man's eyes narrowed, finally betraying the faintest hint of fear. "You think it ends here?" "It doesn't. This network will protect itself." Claire's gaze hardened. "Then I'll keep following it. Until it doesn't." The boarding team secured the man and the vessel. Claire examined the remaining consoles, downloading logs and transmissions into a secure drive. Every file she copied was a key to unraveling years of deception and manipulation. Elias's breadcrumb trail, the hidden assets, Orphic's operations, all were coming into the light. The storm from earlier had passed, leaving the sea calm, almost deceptively peaceful. Claire stood at the edge of the deck, staring into the horizon. She could almost feel Elias Ward somewhere out there, watching, hoping. The puzzle was far from complete, but the first major piece had been secured. Halvorsen joined her silently. "You did well," he said, voice low. "More than well. You faced ghosts, Claire, and you didn't flinch." She let herself exhale, a long, slow release of tension. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." "No," he agreed. "But for now, you've leveled the playing field. And that's all anyone can ask for." Claire turned back to the secured console. The blinking lights of the drives reflected in her eyes. The hidden files were only the beginning, and she knew the next steps would be harder. Far harder. But she was ready. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding. She was back. Lieutenant Hawkeye Donovan was alive, focused, and determined. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, indifferent to human struggles, but for Claire, it had never felt more alive. And somewhere out there, Elias's trail still waited to be followed. The sun rose slowly over the Indian Ocean, painting the water in soft golds and silvers. Claire Donovan stood on the deck of the Arcturus, staring at the horizon. The Orphic vessel was secured, the operator detained, and the majority of the encrypted files safely copied onto secure drives. But she knew the work wasn't over. Somewhere, hidden deep within government networks, the architects of sea glass still lingered, shadows too careful to be caught by ordinary means. Yet for the first time in years, Claire felt a quiet steadiness. She had faced ghosts literal and figurative and survived. She was no longer the haunted young lieutenant who had been blamed for a mission she didn't fail. She had reclaimed her name. Back aboard the ship's command deck, Halvorsen and Commander Stokes pored over the decrypted files with Claire. Every revelation painted a picture far larger than sea glass. Orphic Systems had been a single node in a vast network of covert operations. A system designed to manipulate missions, move assets, and erase inconvenient truths. Every piece she touched in the past, every override, every calculation had been carefully observed, repurposed by those who sought power and control. Finch's voice was tense. This network, it's massive. If we leak this information indiscriminately, it could cause global consequences. Hundreds of operations, lives, all intertwined. Claire nodded slowly. Then we release it carefully. Evidence first. Operators, timelines, proof of the manipulations. The world needs to know, but we do it responsibly. Halvorsen clapped a hand on her shoulder. You've done more than anyone could ask, Claire. You've untangled threads no one else could see. Now, it's time to decide what you want to do next. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, where the water kissed the sky. For years, she had defined herself by the missions she executed, the failures she carried, and the identity that had been stripped away. Now, she had choices. The journey back to Norfolk was quiet. The crew spoke in hushed tones, sensing the gravity of what they carried. Claire spent hours reviewing the files, ensuring every piece of evidence was correctly catalogued. But in the quiet moments, her mind drifted. She thought of Elias Ward, his breadcrumb trail, his warnings. She wondered if he had survived, if he was out there somewhere, watching the world shift because of the truths he had unearthed. By the time the Arcturus docked, the sun had dipped low, casting the city in a warm orange glow. The harbor bustled with activity, unaware of the secrets the ship carried, of the woman who had once been blamed and was now the key to revealing the hidden realities of power. Claire and Halvorsen entered the Naval Intelligence Office. Finch had already prepared a secure debriefing room. The moment she stepped inside, she realized how far she had come. The walls were lined with screens, each showing pieces of the decrypted network. Maps, transmissions, and encrypted nodes blinked in real time, evidence of decades of manipulation finally laid bare. Claire approached the largest screen, fingers hovering above the console. She entered the final authorization codes, and a cascade of evidence unfolded. Timelines of operations, manipulated missions, and Orphic's movements. Names, dates, and actions, everything meticulously documented. Halvorsen watched her work. This will change things. People will be held accountable. Histories rewritten. Careers rebuilt or destroyed. She nodded, eyes focused. It's not about revenge. It's about the truth. If we do this right, no one will be able to hide behind lies again. Hours later, after submitting the final reports to command and oversight agencies, Claire finally stepped outside. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of the sea. She walked along the pier alone, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the dock. For the first time in over a decade, there was no pressure pressing her chest. No accusations. No hidden eyes. Just silence and clarity. A familiar voice called from behind her. You've done it. She turned to see Halvorsen standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, expression calm but approving. I wasn't sure you'd take it this far, he admitted. Few could. Claire smiled faintly. I couldn't stop. Not when I had the pieces in front of me. Elias left the trail for me. It was my responsibility to follow it. Halvorsen nodded. And now it's done. The evidence is secure, and those responsible will be exposed. You've redeemed not only your name, but the truth itself. She exhaled slowly. I hope so. I've carried this for too long to let it remain hidden. The next morning, Claire returned to the diner where it all began. The smell of coffee greeted her, familiar and comforting. Martha was behind the counter, eyes widening slightly as Claire walked in. You're back, Martha said, voice warm. And you look lighter, like something's lifted. Claire smiled. I suppose it is. She moved behind the counter, filling cups and refilling sugar containers with practiced ease. But this time, it felt different. She was no longer hiding. She was part of the world, but she had reclaimed her identity, her story, and her agency. A small envelope sat on the counter, addressed to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from Elias Ward. Hawkeye, if you're reading this, you found the trail. You are the only one who could. The network may still cast shadows, but the light is yours now. Follow it wisely. Claire held the letter close, a sense of closure washing over her. Elias had survived. The breadcrumb trail he left had guided her, not just to uncover the truth, but to reclaim herself. Weeks later, Claire stood once more at the harbor, watching ships glide in and out, the sun setting in a brilliant display of oranges and pinks. The world continued, indifferent and vast, yet she felt connected to it in a way she hadn't in years. Her life had been fractured, manipulated, and hidden, but she had pieced it together. She smiled to herself. The world still held shadows, secrets, manipulations, unseen forces, but she had learned something essential. She could navigate them. She could reclaim what was hers, and she could protect those who could not protect themselves. A young sailor passed by, glancing at her. Lieutenant Donovan? She looked at him, surprised. Yes, he saluted. Thank you. For everything. She returned the salute, shoulders squared. Take care. And remember, you make your own path. As he walked away, Claire took a deep breath of the salty air, feeling the ocean breeze fill her lungs. The past was behind her, but the future stretched endlessly ahead. And this time, she was ready. Hawkeye Donovan had returned from the shadows. The world had changed, and so had she. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. The diner, the harbor, the missions, the conspiracies, they were all pieces of the same story. And now, Claire could finally write the next chapter herself. The sun dipped below the horizon, and she smiled. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with certainty. Her story was her own again. And somewhere, out across the endless sea, Elias Ward was smiling too, knowing she had succeeded.